The courtroom was silent. Tension filled the air like a storm about to break. All eyes were on Judge Patricia Reynolds, a woman known for her no-nonsense attitude and sharp tongue. But today, something was different. Today, she wasn't just delivering justice. She was delivering something far worse. Across the room, standing tall in a sharp blue suit, was Marcus Johnson. A successful businessman, a dedicated father, and at this moment, a man fighting for his rights. He had come here expecting a fair trial, expecting justice. But from the moment he walked in, he knew something was off. The way Judge Reynolds looked at him, the way she barely acknowledged his presence, it was like she had already made up her mind. "Let's get this over with," she said, shuffling some papers in front of her. Her voice carried no patience, no interest in hearing his side of the story. Marcus took a deep breath, determined not to let the weight of the moment shake him. He had done nothing wrong, and he was here to prove it. But before he could even get a word in, Judge Reynolds leaned forward and scoffed. "You people always have an excuse, don't you?" she muttered, loud enough for the entire courtroom to hear. A hush fell over the crowd. Did she really just say that? Marcus felt his stomach drop, his hands tightening into fists at his sides. He had dealt with discrimination before, but never like this. Never in a place where justice was supposed to be blind. His attorney, Lisa Carter, a fierce and determined lawyer, immediately stood up. "Your Honor, I'd like to remind the court that my client is here as a citizen, seeking fair and unbiased judgment." Comments like that. Judge Reynolds waved a dismissive hand. "Sit down, Miss Carter. I run this courtroom, and I don't need a lecture." The arrogance in her voice sent a ripple of unease through the room. Some of the people watching in the gallery exchanged glances, whispering among themselves. The tension was unbearable. Marcus could feel the eyes of the jury shifting, uncertain, as if they too sensed that something wasn't right. Still, he refused to be intimidated. He cleared his throat, forcing himself to stay calm. "Your Honor, with all due respect, I just want a fair chance to present my case." Judge Reynolds smirked. "Fair? Do you even know what that means?" The words hit like a slap. It was blatant, open, and worst of all, it was happening in a place where fairness was supposed to be guaranteed. Marcus could see the satisfaction on the judge's face as she sat back, as if daring him to react. For a moment, he considered responding, but then something unexpected happened. The doors at the back of the courtroom swung open, and a man in a dark suit entered, walking briskly toward the judge's bench. The room turned to watch, murmurs spreading through the crowd. Judge Reynolds frowned. "Who do you think you are, barging into my courtroom?" The man didn't flinch. He pulled out a badge and held it up for all to see. "Agent Thompson, Department of Justice." "Judge Reynolds, we need to have a word." Now, the color drained from her face. The once confident judge, who had been so quick to belittle Marcus, suddenly looked uneasy. Marcus exchanged a look with Lisa. What was happening? The agent didn't wait for an invitation. He stepped closer, his voice firm. "Judge Reynolds, you're under federal investigation. And as of this moment, you are no longer in charge of this courtroom." Gasps erupted from the gallery. The jury, the lawyers, even the bailiff looked stunned. Judge Reynolds' mouth opened and closed as if searching for words. But for the first time today, she had nothing to say. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. Was this really happening? After everything she had just done, after humiliating him in front of everyone, was justice actually turning back on her? The judge swallowed hard. "This is ridiculous. You have no right." Agent Thompson cut her off. "Oh, we do. And if I were you, I'd stay seated. Because what happens next isn't up to you anymore." The courtroom was frozen, all eyes on the woman who had just moments ago been in control. Now she was the one on trial. And Marcus? He was finally about to see what real justice looked like. Let me know if you want any changes. Judge Reynolds sat frozen in her chair, her fingers gripping the edge of her desk, as if holding on for dear life. The confidence she had just moments ago, the smug arrogance that had filled the courtroom, was gone. The room, once under her control, was now slipping away from her grasp. Marcus watched carefully, his heart pounding. He had walked into this courtroom expecting to defend himself, but now he was watching something far bigger unfold. His lawyer, Lisa, sat beside him, just as stunned. The murmurs in the gallery grew louder, whispers spreading like wildfire. "What's going on?" someone muttered. "Did they just say she's under investigation?" another voice added. Agent Thompson didn't move, his badge still visible, his expression firm. "Judge Reynolds, you're to remain seated while we proceed with this matter. The Department of Justice has been conducting an investigation into your courtroom practices, and after recent findings, we can no longer allow you to preside over any further cases." The judge's face twisted with anger. "This is absurd. I demand to know what this is about." Thompson raised an eyebrow. "I think you already know." The room fell silent again. A thick, uncomfortable tension settled in. Marcus could see the fear in Reynolds' eyes, even though she was trying to hide it. He had seen that look before, the look of someone who knew they had been caught. Lisa leaned toward Marcus, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is big. They don't just walk in like this unless they have serious evidence." Marcus nodded, his mind racing. He had suspected that the judge was biased from the moment he stepped into the courtroom, but he never imagined that someone like her would actually be under investigation. And if the Department of Justice was stepping in now, it meant that they had been watching her for a while. The judge scoffed, shaking her head. "This is a joke, a waste of time. I have served this court for years." Agent Thompson cut her off. "And during those years, there have been multiple reports against you. Complaints about unfair rulings, clear discrimination, and violations of the Judicial Code of Conduct. You have silenced voices, dismissed cases without reason, and made decisions that benefited those you personally favored. But it didn't stop there, did it? The entire courtroom was now hanging on to every word." Judge Reynolds clenched her jaw. "I don't know what you're talking about." Thompson took a slow step forward. "You think people haven't noticed? You think no one has spoken up? Do you really believe you could have used your position for this long and get away with it?" Marcus inhaled sharply, realizing what was happening. This wasn't just about him. It was bigger than him. How many others had come before him? How many had been silenced by this judge, walked out of this courtroom without justice, simply because she had the power to do it? Lisa leaned in again, her voice urgent. "This could change everything, Marcus. If she's removed, it could open up past cases. People who were wrongfully treated might finally get their voices heard." Marcus's hands tightened into fists, a wave of emotions crashing over him. He thought about his own case, about how she had treated him with such blatant disrespect, as if his words didn't matter. But now, sitting in that chair, stripped of her power, she was the one scrambling to be heard. Reynolds shook her head, laughing bitterly. "This is ridiculous. You don't have anything on me." Thompson's lips curled into a knowing smile. "You sure about that?" For the first time, doubt flickered in her eyes. She glanced toward the bailiff, but he remained still, his hands folded in front of him. He wasn't going to help her. No one was. Thompson turned to the courtroom. "I want to make something clear to everyone here. No one is above the law. Not a judge, not an attorney, not anyone. This courtroom belongs to the people, and justice is meant to be served fairly. That is not what has been happening here. Marcus felt a strange sense of satisfaction, but also a deep sadness. This was justice, but it shouldn't have taken this long. It shouldn't have taken so many people suffering before something was done. Judge Reynolds leaned forward, her voice low and filled with fury. "You don't have proof." Thompson smirked. "Oh, we have plenty." The courtroom held its breath. Marcus could feel the energy shifting. The once powerful judge, the woman who had treated him like nothing, was now the one on the defensive. And for the first time in her life, she was the one who had to answer for her actions. But the real question was, what would happen next? Judge Reynolds' hands trembled ever so slightly as she gripped the arms of her chair. Her eyes darted across the courtroom, searching for someone, anyone, who would step in and stop this from happening. But no one moved. Not the jury, not the bailiff, not even the court clerk who had worked under her for years. The power she once held, the fear she had instilled in so many, was slipping through her fingers like sand. Marcus felt the weight of the moment. He had walked into this courtroom expecting another battle, another uphill fight against a system that had never been on his side. But now, for the first time, he was watching that same system turn on one of its own. Lisa sat beside him, her expression unreadable. But Marcus could tell she was thinking the same thing he was. What exactly had they found? What had finally been enough to bring someone like Judge Reynolds down? Agent Thompson reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thin stack of documents. He held them up, his voice calm but firm. "Judge Reynolds, we have official complaints from attorneys, former defendants, even other judges. But that's not all. We have financial records, evidence of backdoor deals, conflicts of interest, and a pattern of cases where your rulings benefited certain individuals who had personal or financial ties to you." The judge's face turned pale, but she quickly masked it with another scoff. "This is nonsense. If you had real evidence, you wouldn't be wasting time making speeches in my courtroom." Thompson didn't react. He simply flipped through the papers, then glanced at the bailiff. "Bailiff Carter, you've worked under Judge Reynolds for years, haven't you?" The entire room turned toward the bailiff. A tall, broad-shouldered man who had remained neutral throughout the trial, Bailiff Carter shifted slightly on his feet. His gaze flickered to the judge, then back to Thompson. "Yes," he said carefully. Thompson nodded. "And in that time, have you ever witnessed behavior that was questionable?" A thick silence fell over the room. The tension was suffocating. The judge's eyes locked onto the bailiff, daring him to speak against her. Bailiff Carter inhaled slowly, then exhaled, his voice even. "I've seen things that didn't sit right with me." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. This was it. The first crack in the judge's defenses. Reynolds turned sharply in her chair. "Carter, you watch yourself." But Carter didn't look away. His voice didn't waver. "I took an oath to uphold justice. And I've followed orders for a long time. But I won't lie. I've seen rulings that didn't make sense. Cases dismissed without reason. Defendants who weren't given a fair chance. And I've seen you treat certain people differently." Judge Reynolds shot up from her seat. Enough. The courtroom went still. Her voice, sharp and commanding, echoed through the room. But there was no authority behind it anymore. It was the voice of someone losing control, someone desperate to stop what was already in motion. Agent Thompson remained unmoved. "You don't get to silence people anymore, Judge Reynolds." She clenched her jaw, her breath uneven. The confidence was cracking, and for the first time, Marcus could see something else in her expression: fear. Lisa leaned in closer to Marcus. "She knows it's over," she whispered. But Marcus wasn't sure. Something about Reynolds' posture, the way her eyes kept scanning the room, made him uneasy. She wasn't just angry, she was calculating. Reynolds slowly sat back down, forcing a smirk. Fine, let's say, for the sake of argument, that you have these so-called records. Let's say you have complaints. Do you really think that's enough to take me down? Do you have actual proof that I did anything illegal? Thompson studied her for a long moment, then reached into his briefcase. He pulled out a USB drive and held it up. Oh, we have more than enough proof. Marcus felt the air in the room shift. Whatever was on that drive, it was enough to shake the judge. Her smirk faded, her fingers tightening into fists. Thompson turned toward the courtroom, his voice clear. This contains recorded conversations, financial transactions, and internal emails that expose the corruption that has been happening right here in this courtroom. And before you claim they're fake, Judge Reynolds, I should let you know. We didn't get these from an outside source. We got them from someone who worked with you. Marcus heard Lisa inhale sharply beside him. The judge's expression darkened. You're lying. But Thompson only smiled. Am I? The silence that followed was unbearable. The entire courtroom was on edge, waiting for what would come next. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. He had come in here to fight for himself. But now it wasn't just about him anymore. The walls were closing in on Judge Reynolds. And this time, there was no escaping. The silence in the courtroom stretched, thick with anticipation. Judge Reynolds' once unwavering confidence was unraveling before everyone's eyes. Her fingers drummed against the desk, her mind visibly racing. Whatever was on that USB drive, it had her shaken. Marcus watched closely, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. He could feel the tension in the air, pressing down on everyone in the room. Lisa, still beside him, remained locked in place, her sharp eyes flicking between Thompson and the judge. Judge Reynolds let out a short, bitter laugh, trying to mask her fear. This is a pathetic attempt at intimidation, she scoffed. You can wave around all the so-called evidence you want, but unless you have something concrete, you're wasting everyone's time. Agent Thompson didn't flinch. He set the USB drive down on the judge's desk, meeting her gaze with calm certainty. Judge Reynolds, you're free to deny everything right now, but I suggest you think carefully before you do. Because in just a few minutes, this evidence will be played right here for the entire courtroom to hear. Every word, every deal, every decision you made to benefit yourself at the expense of justice. A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd. Even the jury, who had been watching the proceedings with caution, were now sitting up straighter, hanging on to every word. The gallery was filled with attorneys, defendants, and people who had spent years fighting against a system that always seemed rigged against them. And now, the very person who had controlled that system in this courtroom was backed into a corner. Judge Reynolds' smirk faltered for just a second, but she recovered quickly. This is outrageous, she snapped. I won't sit here and be ambushed in my own courtroom. Agent Thompson's lips curled slightly, the closest thing to a smile he had shown all day. Funny, that's exactly how so many people have felt standing in front of you. Marcus felt a surge of something unfamiliar, vindication. He had stood where she was trying to place herself now, forced to defend himself against unfair accusations, his words dismissed before they were even considered. But now, for the first time, Judge Reynolds was the one fighting to be heard, and no one was rushing to protect her. The judge turned toward the bailiff again. Carter, remove Agent Thompson from my courtroom immediately. Bailiff Carter didn't move. Judge Reynolds' jaw tightened. That was an order. For the first time, Carter met her gaze with something cold and unreadable in his eyes. Actually, Judge, he said, his voice steady, I think you should listen to what they have to say. A slow, stunned realization washed over her. The people she had always relied on, the people who once followed her without question, were no longer standing behind her. Marcus saw it happen, the exact moment Judge Reynolds understood she was alone. She swallowed hard, her fingers gripping the edge of the desk as though it could anchor her. Then, with a sharp breath, she pushed herself up from her chair and straightened her robe, trying to regain the authority she was rapidly losing. "Fine," she said, her voice dripping with forced confidence. "Play your so-called evidence. Let's see how far this little stunt gets you." Agent Thompson nodded, unbothered by her bravado. He signaled to a technician sitting at the back of the room, who immediately began setting up a speaker system. The air in the courtroom grew even heavier, the tension almost unbearable. Marcus felt his hands clench into fists. This was it. Judge Reynolds shifted her weight slightly, her hands no longer resting on the desk but hovering near her robe, as if she were bracing herself for something. Her expression remained neutral, but there was something else in her eyes now, an edge of desperation, a growing panic just beneath the surface. Then the first recording began to play. A grainy but unmistakable voice echoed through the courtroom. "I don't care what the evidence says. He's not getting a fair ruling in my courtroom. Make sure the jury understands that." A sharp gasp came from someone in the gallery. Marcus felt his breath catch. That voice, it was hers. The judge's face lost all color. Before anyone could react, the recording continued. "Don't bring me another one of these cases unless we already know the outcome. I don't want surprises. You understand me?" A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the room. Judge Reynolds opened her mouth, but no words came out. She glanced around, looking for someone, anyone, to come to her defense. But all she saw were wide eyes and stunned faces. Lisa turned to Marcus, whispering under her breath, "She's done." But Marcus wasn't so sure. Because just as Agent Thompson moved to continue, Judge Reynolds did something no one expected. She reached down, yanked open a drawer, and pulled something out. Marcus' stomach dropped. And in an instant, the entire courtroom was thrown into chaos. Guests filled the courtroom as Judge Reynolds' hand shot into the open drawer. For a split second, it seemed like she might try something reckless, something desperate. But instead of a weapon or a hidden escape plan, she pulled out a small, sleek flash drive and held it tightly in her palm. Her breathing was uneven, her mind visibly racing. "You think you have everything," she said, her voice quieter now, but laced with something dangerous. "But you don't know the whole story." Agent Thompson took a step forward, his eyes narrowing. "What are you talking about?" Judge Reynolds exhaled sharply, glancing around the room like a cornered animal, deciding whether to fight or surrender. Then, to everyone's surprise, she slowly placed the flash drive on the desk in front of her. "This isn't just about me," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "You're all so eager to see me fall, but if I go down, I'm not going alone." A thick, uneasy silence spread through the courtroom. Marcus exchanged a glance with Lisa. This wasn't the reaction of someone who knew they were finished. This was something else. A final play. A hidden card waiting to be flipped. Thompson kept his expression unreadable. "What's on that drive?" Judge Reynolds let out a bitter laugh. "You want corruption. You want real power plays." She looked directly at him now. "That drive has names. Judges, attorneys, politicians, people who make me look like an amateur." The entire courtroom stiffened. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. He had walked into this room believing that Reynolds was the final obstacle, the highest wall standing in his way. But now, as she sat there, her hands clenched into fists, it became clear. She wasn't the top of the chain. She was just part of something much bigger. Lisa whispered, She's bluffing. But Marcus wasn't sure. The judge's hands were trembling, not out of fear, but rage. She wasn't just trying to save herself. She was trying to burn everything down with her. Agent Thompson didn't move. He studied the judge carefully before reaching for the drive. The second his fingers touched it, Reynolds leaned forward. "You think you're in control," she hissed. "You have no idea what you've just stepped into." Thompson didn't flinch. He simply straightened, holding up the drive for everyone to see. "Then let's find out." For the first time, genuine panic flashed across Judge Reynolds' face. No, wait. But it was too late. Thompson handed the drive off to his colleague, who immediately moved toward a laptop. The gallery was dead silent now, the weight of the moment pressing on everyone. Reynolds' fingers dug into the desk. "You don't know what you're doing." Thompson folded his arms. "Then why are you so afraid?" The judge's mouth opened, but before she could say another word, the screen flickered to life. A series of documents popped up: transaction records, private emails, signed agreements, names upon names. And then a video file. The room went still. Lisa sucked in a breath. Marcus felt his stomach twist. The technician clicked play. A grainy security camera recording filled the screen. A large, dimly lit office. A group of men and women sitting around a long conference table, their faces partially visible. And at the head of the table, speaking in a low, commanding voice. A man in a high-ranking government position, a name everyone in that room knew. Marcus' blood ran cold. This wasn't just a corrupt judge. This wasn't just about unfair trials and biased rulings. This was bigger. Much, much bigger. Judge Reynolds had been right. She wasn't the final piece of the puzzle. She was just the beginning. The courtroom was frozen in place, every pair of eyes locked on the screen as the grainy footage played. The man at the head of the table leaned forward, his voice low but clear enough to send chills down Marcus' spine. "This is how things work. We decide who wins before the case even starts. We control the judges, the rulings, the outcomes. No surprises, no risks." The room in the video was filled with men and women in expensive suits, some nodding, some simply listening. And there, sitting near the edge of the table, was Judge Reynolds. She had been part of something bigger, something deeply embedded in the system. Lisa's fingers dug into Marcus' arm. "This isn't just a local scandal. This is national," Marcus whispered, unable to tear his eyes away from the screen. Judge Reynolds sat frozen at her desk, all the fight drained from her. There was no more arrogance, no more fake confidence. Just quiet, sinking defeat. She had thought she could use this information to leverage her way out, but now, in front of a packed courtroom, it was clear. This wasn't just going to take her down. It was going to take down people far more powerful than anyone had realized. Agent Thompson stepped forward, his face unreadable. "Judge Reynolds, do you realize what you've just done?" She swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "I tried to warn you." The doors to the courtroom suddenly burst open. Several more agents stormed inside, their presence sending another wave of shock through the audience. They weren't just here for Judge Reynolds anymore. The man at the head of the video, the one giving orders, wasn't in the room, but the people who worked for him were. A few attorneys, even some members of the jury, shifted uncomfortably as the agents moved through the crowd, scanning faces. "This isn't just about you anymore," Thompson continued, looking directly at Reynolds. "You were following orders, but now we have the people giving them." A bitter smile crossed her lips. "You really think you can touch them?" Thompson didn't answer. Instead, he nodded toward his team, who immediately started securing evidence. The flash drive, the recordings, the documents, It was all being processed in real time. Then, without another word, he turned to the bailiff. "Take her into custody." Judge Reynolds let out a slow, shaky breath. There was no out, no deal left to make. The power she had wielded for so long had crumbled right beneath her. She stood, hands trembling as she placed them behind her back. The cold steel of the cuffs clicked into place. The same treatment she had ordered for so many others was now happening to her. As she was led away, Marcus watched her go, feeling the weight of it all settle in his chest. It wasn't just relief, it was something deeper. Justice. Not just for himself, but for everyone who had stood before her and never had a chance. Lisa exhaled sharply beside him. "I can't believe it actually happened." But just as Marcus was about to respond, something caught his attention. Across the room, one of the attorneys who had been sitting silently through the trial was now slipping toward the back exit, his expression tight with barely concealed panic. Marcus nudged Lisa. "Look." Lisa followed his gaze, and in an instant, she understood. He's in on it. Before they could react, the attorney bolted for the door. But this time, he wouldn't get away. Because just as he reached the exit, two more agents stepped into his path, blocking his escape. The corruption ran deep, but for the first time, it was finally being exposed. And this was only the beginning. The attorney froze in place as the agents closed in on him. Beads of sweat formed on his forehead, his breathing uneven as he realized there was no way out. He had been careful for years, operating in the shadows, making sure nothing ever pointed back to him. But now, with everything crumbling, the weight of his choices was finally catching up. Agent Thompson gave him a long, knowing look. Going somewhere. The attorney swallowed hard, but he didn't speak. He knew anything he said now could only make things worse. Slowly, he raised his hands in surrender. The agents moved in swiftly, securing his wrists in cuffs. It was almost poetic. One by one, the people who had thought themselves untouchable were finally facing justice. Marcus watched as the scene unfolded, his mind still racing. It was hard to believe how much had changed in just a matter of hours. He had walked into this courtroom expecting the worst, bracing himself for yet another loss. But now, not only had the truth come out, but it had revealed something far bigger than anyone had anticipated. Lisa let out a long breath beside him. "This feels unreal." Marcus nodded. "Yeah, but it's happening."